Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled The Bikeriders. Let's get straight into the storyline. The film begins by showing a woman named Kathy visiting a bar to meet her friend. However, the bar is filled with rough, scruffy men who reek of tobacco. There, Kathy sits with her friend to discuss money problems, but the noisy bar makes them uncomfortable. In fact, the scruffy men there continue to harass and tease them. As Kathy is about to leave the filthy place, she spots a handsome man named Benny, who instantly makes her fall in love at first sight. As a result, she sits back down, hoping he will approach her. It doesn't take long for Benny to come over and introduce himself.
Hello?
I'm Benny.
Unfortunately, Kathy already has a boyfriend, making her hesitant to pursue a relationship with Benny.
Okay. You gotta go.
Not long after, another man approached her. It turned out that this man was named Johnny, the most respected person in the bar. Here, it was revealed that the smelly men were members of a motorcycle gang called the Chicago Vandals, formed by Johnny. To reassure Kathy, he said that all his members followed the rules, which included not harming women and children. However, Kathy still doesn't believe Johnny and chooses to leave the bar.
Being grabbed about
Before being bothered again by the gangsters, she hopped on Benny's motorcycle because she thought Benny wasn't like his friends. Without thinking twice, Benny took her for a ride around the city. At the same time, Johnny leads his gang in following the two of them. At first, Kathy thought they would ruin her night, but it turned out the gangsters were actually protecting them from being attacked by another gang. At this point, Kathy believed Johnny's words that they wouldn't cause trouble for her. After enjoying the motorcycle ride, Benny safely escorted her home. However, at the door, Kathy's boyfriend was waiting angrily because she had come home with a man. Moreover, Benny refused to leave Kathy's house. He even seemed to deliberately stay there until morning. The next day, Benny was still sitting on his motorcycle despite being told to leave multiple times. Eventually, Kathy's boyfriend had enough and ended the relationship. From that day on, Benny and Kathy officially got married. A month later, Benny, now nicknamed the Street Devil, became a fugitive from traffic police for his reckless driving. Unfortunately, he failed to escape their pursuit this time because his motorcycle broke down.
The farmland on Highway 64.
However, after a week, Benny was released from the police station after proving his innocence. This also impressed the other gang members. Here, Johnny also praised Benny for always getting out of trouble, especially since Benny always seemed clueless about whatever he faced.
But it felt like more.
Deep down in his heart, Johnny didn't want to overthink things and wanted to be like his subordinates. We are shown a flashback to 7 years earlier when Johnny was still working as a truck driver. Unlike the other gang members, Johnny was a good man with a wife and 2 children. In addition, he lived a decent life and had never been homeless. However, one night, he watched a film about a gangster group. Because of that film, he suddenly got inspired to start a community. Since he was close to the motorbike kids, he began gathering them at the illegal racing circuit. From that gathering, Johnny successfully formed the Chicago Vandals, the first motorbike gang in the world. Although it started with only 12 members, the gang grew to become very large over time. Unlike the motorcycle gangs we know today, the Chicago Vandals initially upheld the principle of family. According to a senior member named Brucey, Johnny always warned his members to focus on motorcycling rather than criminal activities. As the gang grew larger, Johnny appointed Brucey as his spokesperson because he didn't want too much talk. Brucey explained all the rules to the new members, including Benny. Additionally, he planned to purchase a special phone so that if any member encountered trouble, they could call the headquarters. This way, Johnny could send someone to resolve the issue. In essence, the principle upheld by the Chicago Vandals is family. However, in the middle of the explanation, a new member suddenly interrupts Brucey's speech. Here, he proposes the idea of establishing a Vandals branch in another city. Without hesitation, Johnny and Brucey immediately reject the idea. Unwilling to accept the decision, the member challenged Johnny to a duel. After all, it was part of the rules that if there was an issue between gang members, it could be resolved through a fight. Without hesitation, Johnny accepted the challenge and immediately dueled on the illegal racetrack.
Oh, my damn finger.
Hey, we done?
Although he was smaller than the member, he was able to defeat him in a matter of seconds. From that moment on, no member dared to challenge Johnny again. One day, a teenager, let's call him Kid, was seen working as a mechanic. After finishing his work, he saw Johnny and his gang conducting a convoy. As a young, ambitious, and challenge-seeking individual, he was immediately attracted to them. In fact, he was determined to join the gang someday. The main reason he wanted to join was because his life was very bleak, and he was often looked down upon by the people around him.
In the street, kid! God!
Meanwhile, Johnny and his friends went to a car exhibition festival to show off their motorcycles while mocking the car drivers. Then, they had a picnic there while chatting casually. However, not long after, they were approached by another motorcycle gang that seemed to have been formed recently. The leader of the gang protested to Johnny because one of the Chicago vandals had scratched one of their motorcycles. As a peace-loving person, Johnny tried to resolve the issue peacefully. But from a distance, Benny saw the motorcycle gang as a threat to the vandals. As a result, he immediately ran over and started a commotion. Fortunately, Johnny was able to calm Benny down, and the fight was stopped. After that, Johnny invited the new motorcycle gang to make peace and drink together. Because instead of being enemies, it was better to be allies. The next day, Benny went to a bar alone to order a drink while listening to music. As usual, Benny never spoke much and always kept to himself. Not long after, two men suddenly forced him to take off his vandal's jacket. Of course, as a loyal member of the gang, Benny wouldn't let anyone take off his pride and joy. As a result, the two men immediately beat him up badly. Here, Benny deliberately didn't fight back because he didn't want to escalate the situation. However, since the two men had gone too far, he eventually took out a knife and fought back on the spot. Because of the fight, Benny's leg was broken and had to be amputated immediately. But he asked Kathy to speak to the doctor so they wouldn't cut off his leg. Without a leg, he couldn't ride recklessly anymore. Hearing this, Kathy could only accept it because her husband prioritized motorcycling over his health. On the other hand, Johnny was furious after learning that his beloved member had been attacked by random men. He and his men immediately went to the bar where the incident occurred to find the person who had injured Benny. Unfortunately, the bar owner refused to help him in the search. It seemed he also didn't want to deal with gang members who always did negative things. At this point, Johnny is fed up because his gang is always seen as a criminal group. As a result, he decided to accept the reality by ordering his members to cut off the legs of the people who attacked Benny and burned down the bar. Soon after, the fire department and police arrived at the scene. However, they dared not extinguish the fire because Johnny and his friends were still there. It turned out that, without them realizing it, the Chicago vandals had grown so powerful that the law enforcement officers were afraid of them. 3 weeks later, Johnny contacted Benny, who was still recovering. After asking about his condition, he intended to invite him to attend a very important gang meeting. Upon hearing this, Kathy refused to allow her husband to go until his leg was fully healed.
I don't want you riding.
You don't like
Oh, I get worried.
However, Benny, who was very loyal to the gang, assured his wife that he would be fine.
I should just go.
The next day, Kathy approached Johnny and persuaded him to expel Benny from the motorcycle gang. As the leader, he could certainly expel anyone from the gang. However, Benny was too loyal to the gang to be expelled so easily. Therefore, Johnny suggested that Kathy not force her husband's will. Besides, Benny was an adult who wouldn't make a decision without careful consideration. Hearing Johnny's words, Kathy was very upset and left without saying a word. Elsewhere, we see Kid, who is very frustrated because his parents are always arguing. His father even hits his mother, causing her pain. Kid, who was fed up, decided to fight back against his father. However, his mother stopped him. Seeing this, Kid chose to run away from home and never return. Meanwhile, Johnny held a gang meeting at the illegal racetrack. As promised, Benny also came, even though he had to walk with a stick and was accompanied by Kathy. Before the important meeting began, Johnny told his men to party first. That night, they held a meeting where each member had to share their unique experiences in life. During the meeting, Johnny called Benny aside for a private conversation. Johnny said he wanted to retire from the motorcycle gang world because the Chicago Vandals had grown too large, and he no longer wanted to be seen as the leader. Therefore, he intended to retire and wanted to pass on his throne to Benny, as he believed Benny was the right person to lead the gang, because he had the potential to be respected by the other members. However, Benny politely refused. He felt that Johnny was a good leader, while he had no leadership qualities at all.
More than this fucking club than my own family. Like, this is my family. That's why it's you. You, who all these guys here, they're all trying to just think it over.
A year later, the Chicago Vandals received the tragic news that Brucey had died in a traffic accident. Upon hearing the news, Johnny was deeply devastated because he had considered Brucey his own brother. However, during the funeral ceremony, Brucey's mother refused to allow him to attend, as she viewed him as a negative influence on Brucey. In fact, she even spat at Johnny in front of the other gang members.
Get out of here.
After the funeral, Johnny and his friends went to a bar to drink and calm themselves down. But not long after, Kid and his friends came to see him. These teenagers said that they had formed their own motorcycle gang, but they wanted to be part of the Vandals alliance. Without hesitation, Johnny agreed to accept Kid on the condition that he leave his friends behind.
But just you. Gotta leave your friends behind.
Of course, Kid immediately agreed to the condition. In fact, it was a test from Johnny to assess whether he was loyal or not. And because he intended to leave his friends, Johnny couldn't accept him into the Vandals. Because all members of the Vandals must be loyal. Kid, who didn't accept the decision, immediately pulled out a knife. Luckily, Johnny managed to deflect the attack and knocked Kid unconscious instantly. He then expelled Kid because someone like Kid was unworthy of being in the Vandals. Day by day passed, and the Chicago Vandals gang continued to grow into a very large gang. But because it had grown so large, the gang split into two factions, the older and younger generations. The older generation tended to be laid back, while the younger generation came from different places and brought different cultures. In fact, they often consumed illegal substances. Besides disobeying the rules, the younger faction also lacked respect for the older faction. One night, they dared to beat up a senior member named Cockroach. Shortly after, Johnny heard that Cockroach had fainted outside the bar. He then asked Benny for help to take him to the hospital. While Benny was away, the new members boldly harassed Kathy, even intending to rape her. Fortunately, Johnny heard the screams and immediately attacked the disrespectful members.
We're just getting our wings.
Get the fuck out of here.
The next day, Cockroach approached Johnny and asked permission to leave the gang, as he could no longer tolerate the new members' disrespectful behavior. However, to avoid being terrorized by them again, Cockroach asked Johnny to pretend to expel him from the gang. This way, the new members would not consider him a traitor. Johnny promised to help him that night.
I want to turn in my colors.
I'll take care of you.
He then told Benny to bring a gun to Cockroach's place that night. Before leaving, Benny was stopped by Kathy, his wife, who immediately urged him to leave the motorcycle gang. She also recounted the incident from the night before, where she had merely been raped by the new members. In short, the Chicago Vandals were no longer what they used to be.
Benny!
What?
Hearing this, Benny said he would definitely leave the gang. But for now, he had to help Johnny, who was struggling to manage the large number of members.
I want you to quit riding. I want you to quit the club.
I gotta go meet Johnny.
The next day, as planned, they would shoot Cockroach's thigh as if he were being punished.
You ready?
Then Johnny told Cockroach to go as far away as possible so he wouldn't be hunted down by the new members. After that, Benny asked why Johnny didn't disband the gang, which was no longer under control. Hearing this, Johnny couldn't say anything because, on one hand, he was no longer able to manage the gang, while on the other hand, he couldn't bring himself to dismantle the gang he had built over more than 10 years. Therefore, he needed Benny's help to resolve the issue.
I need you.
However, Benny seemed resigned, and this might be his last day as a member of the Chicago Vandals.
It's not me.
A year after Benny's departure, the gang became even more chaotic. In fact, they now had many branches across America, and one of those branches had accepted Kid and his friends. Now, Kid was old enough and felt ready to become the gang's leader. Therefore, he challenges Johnny to a duel, where the winner will become the leader of the Vandals. Here, Kid also challenges Johnny to a duel using knives, meaning the fight will stop if one of them is killed. Before the fight, Johnny bids farewell to his wife and decides to visit Benny's house first. However, Kathy says that her husband has not been home for a year. Finally, Johnny leaves and tells Kathy to take care of herself. That night, Johnny goes to the dueling site and prepares to defend the gang from people like Kid. But just as he is ready, Kid suddenly pulls out a gun. After killing Johnny treacherously, Kid took over the Chicago Vandals and turned them into a criminal gang. Additionally, they sold contraband, set up gambling dens, and so on. They even offered assassination services to anyone who needed them. Meanwhile, the former longtime members of the Vandals chose to leave and start anew. Some opened motorcycle workshops, while others became traffic police. On the other hand, Benny, who was still traveling around America, finally heard the news that Johnny had died. He was deeply shocked and decided to return home. There, he apologized to Kathy for leaving without saying goodbye. After that, he suddenly shed tears, even though he had never cried before. But since learning of Johnny's death, he could no longer hold back his sadness, as Johnny had always been like a brother to him. In short, Benny and Kathy moved to Florida to start a new chapter. Now, Benny no longer rides a motorcycle since Johnny's death. Additionally, he started working at a workshop with his cousin and tried to live happily.